The decline of the Second Bulgarian Empire is one of those long and painful stories of a kingdom that, despite moments of brilliance, never managed to build lasting stability. Many point to the reign of the child king Kaliman Asen I as the beginning of the end. He was far too young to rule, and the empire was placed in the hands of regents who were expected to protect it until he came of age. But the regents themselves were weak and hesitant. Instead of resisting the growing Mongol menace, they chose to pay tribute in hopes of buying peace. This policy may have spared Bulgaria from devastation in the short term, but it revealed weakness and created a precedent that others could exploit. Meanwhile, the nobility inside Bulgaria saw opportunities to expand their own power. Rivalries and schisms began to open cracks in the empire's foundations. The boy king died before reaching 13, and power shifted to Michael Asen, who was also a child and was therefore managed by a regent. This cycle of instability repeated itself again and again. Kaliman Asen II usurped the throne, but was quickly murdered. His successor Mitso Asen held power for only a short time before being challenged. Thrones changed hands rapidly. Bulgaria became notorious for its fragile monarchy. Foreign powers could see this weakness clearly. The Nicene Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary began chipping away at Bulgarian territory, often without serious opposition. The empire that had once stood proudly in the Balkans now looked like easy prey. This instability eventually led to the reign of Constantine Teak. Constantine inherited a kingdom surrounded by enemies: the Byzantines to the south, the Hungarians to the north, and dissatisfied nobles within his own borders all posed threats. There were also pretenders to the throne waiting for their chance to strike. Constantine's difficulties grew even worse after an accident left him crippled. Unable to command armies in the field and exhausted from endless troubles, he faced his gravest challenge in 1277 when a large-scale peasant revolt erupted. The rebellion was led by a man named Ivailo. Ivailo was a charismatic figure, and in the chaos of the revolt he managed to kill Emperor Constantine himself. The Bulgarian throne suddenly belonged to a peasant leader who had risen from nothing. His claims shocked the nobility and outraged the Byzantines. Ivailo managed to enter the capital city of Tarnovo and was declared emperor, but this only intensified the struggle. The Byzantines refused to accept his rule and sought Mongol support to overthrow him. For a time, Ivailo resisted successfully, but eventually the Mongols assassinated him. After his death, the Bulgarian nobility elected George I Terter as emperor, but this decision failed to restore stability. The empire stumbled from one ruler to the next, with little unity or vision. At the beginning of the 14th century, Theodore Sviatoslav came to power, and for a brief moment Bulgaria experienced stability. Theodore managed to end the destructive Mongol raids and strengthen the borders. He even pushed back against Byzantine efforts to destabilize him. He restored peace with Bulgaria's neighbors, and for the first time in many years it seemed the empire might be secure. But this stability was temporary. After Theodore's death, his successors proved incapable of maintaining his achievements. Bulgaria slipped back into the same pattern of on-and-off warfare. Conflicts with Byzantines, Serbians, and Hungarians kept the country exhausted. Yet these were not the enemies who would deliver the final blow. That role belonged to the rising Ottoman Turks. By the middle of the 14th century, the Ottomans were expanding relentlessly into Europe. The reigning Bulgarian Emperor Ivan Alexander tried to halt their advance, but his efforts failed. He was also engaged in struggles against the Byzantines and could not fight on both fronts at once. By the time of his death in 1371, the empire was already fractured and weakened beyond repair. Contemporary accounts from Johann Schildberger describe Bulgaria not as a united kingdom, but as three separate regions. One was centered on Vidin, another around Tarnovo, and a third near the Black Sea with its capital at Kaliakra. Ivan Sratsimir ruled Vidin. Ivan Shishman governed Tarnovo. Dobrotitsa controlled the coastal lands. Bulgaria was split into pieces, each one vulnerable to outside attack. The Ottomans saw this division as an opportunity. Ivan Shishman tried to preserve what remained by accepting vassal status under the Ottomans in 1371. For a brief time, there was peace, but Ottoman ambition could not be contained. By the 1380s, attacks resumed with greater intensity. Shishman was caught in conflict not only with the Ottomans, but also with the Wallachians and his rival Ivan Sratsimir in Vidin. These distractions left his lands exposed. The Ottomans pressed harder, and in 1393 they captured Tarnovo. 2 years later, Shishman himself was killed. Vidin held out a little longer, but fell in 1396. Historians mark this as the official end of the Second Bulgarian Empire. Resistance did not vanish overnight. Leaders such as Frugin and Constantine tried to rally opposition in the following century. But their efforts were too little too late. The Ottomans were far too powerful. Bulgaria would remain under foreign domination for centuries, and true independence would not return until the 20th century. So why did the Second Bulgarian Empire collapse so completely? Why was it such an easy target for Ottoman conquest? The answer lies in both external and internal problems. From its very birth, the empire was unstable. It was the second attempt to build a Bulgarian state after the fall of the First Empire. The Byzantines had interfered in Bulgarian affairs for generations. The First Empire itself had collapsed under external attacks from the Magyars, Byzantines and Rus, as well as internal discord. When the Byzantines annexed the remnants in the early 11th century, it seemed Bulgarian independence was gone forever. Only in the late 12th century did the brothers Ivan and Peter Asen rise in rebellion and force the Byzantines to recognize a new Bulgarian empire. For a brief time, this reborn state held promise, but its foundations were fragile. Even religion became a point of conflict. At times, rulers tried to align with Rome, at other times with Constantinople. Ordinary Bulgarians remained largely orthodox, but political games created uncertainty. The strongest period came under Ivan Asen II in the early 13th century. Under his rule, based in Tarnovo, Bulgaria became a true Balkan power. But his successors lacked his ability. Weak monarchs allowed the nobility to feud constantly. These rivalries opened the way for foreign intervention. The Mongols launched raids that drained Bulgaria's strength. The Byzantines never stopped trying to influence or control the throne. The Hungarians and Serbs struck whenever they saw an opportunity. Bulgaria's geographical position meant it was surrounded by ambitious neighbors. In such an environment, only a united and determined state could survive. Instead, Bulgaria was divided from within. The nobility often supported rival claimants to the throne, and foreign powers were eager to back these claimants in exchange for influence. It was common for emperors to be children placed under the control of regents. Weak leadership created an endless cycle of usurpations, conspiracies, and betrayals. Every time the empire looked like it might recover, new quarrels or invasions dragged it back down. When the Ottomans appeared, they were unlike the older enemies. Byzantines, Hungarians, and Serbs might seize a fortress or a province, but they were not in a position to eliminate Bulgaria completely. The Ottomans, however, were building a vast empire driven by expansion and faith. They advanced methodically across the Balkans. Divided Bulgaria was simply unable to resist them. By the late 14th century, the end was inevitable. The fall of the Second Bulgarian Empire was not just the loss of territory. It was the collapse of an identity that had taken centuries to forge. Tarnovo, once celebrated as a center of culture, and learning, fell silent. The nobility, who had once schemed for thrones, found themselves powerless under Ottoman rule. The peasants, who had once followed Ivailo in revolt, now endured centuries of hardship under a foreign sultan. Yet the memory of the empire never completely disappeared. Even under Ottoman domination, Bulgarians preserved their language, their church, and their traditions. Songs and stories kept alive the memory of the medieval kingdom. When national revival came in the 19th century, it drew heavily on the legacy of both the First and Second Empires. The collapse in the 14th century had been total, but it was not permanent. Looking back, we can see the Second Bulgarian Empire as a cautionary tale. It shows how internal division can be just as dangerous as external enemies. It shows how child rulers, weak regencies, and feuding nobles can undermine a state's survival. And it shows how even a once powerful kingdom can be reduced to nothing when it cannot adapt to new threats. The Second Bulgarian Empire rose out of rebellion against the Byzantines. It enjoyed moments of glory, but was plagued from the beginning by fragile foundations. Over the course of 2 centuries, it was eroded by Mongol raids, noble conspiracies, shifting alliances, and endless wars. In the end, the Ottomans delivered the final blow. But the seeds of collapse had been planted long before their armies arrived. The story of Bulgaria in the Middle Ages is therefore not just about conquest. It is also about resilience. For although the state fell, the people endured, and centuries later, independence returned. The Second Bulgarian Empire may have collapsed, but its legacy remained a vital part of Bulgarian history.